Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome. Bonjour. Indeed, some familiar faces. So it was a great roundtable discussion, and I will follow on my talk right from there, actually, and talking about the accessible open web platform and how that relates to the Internet of Things, but also to the Web of Things. And I'll explain that in just a minute. So, yes, thank you for the kind words, Jan. My name is Shadi ABOU ZAHRA from the World Wide Web Consortium. I work at the Web Accessibility Initiative. There's a lot of work happening at W3C on the Internet of Things, and as has been previously said, it's a huge opportunity for people with disabilities to have equal access and to enable all those things. I remember way back in, I don't know, in the 70s already, seeing, specially built devices for people with mobility impairments to open windows or to help them, carry out certain aspects. And now all those technologies are much more affordable. You go to a store and you can buy already sensors to turn on your lights automatically and whatnot, to turn your light bulb through the remote control. All those things are becoming much more affordable and much more self-driving cars and all those things. So the first slide, the image here represents just the Internet of Things as has been talked about a lot, and its impact on all sorts of different aspects, on industry, on mobility and driving, on the smart grid, all those different aspects of all of our lives. But we believe that the interface, and this was being talked about, the universal interface could be the web. So as the web is the interface for the traditional internet, the new web could also be the interface to the new internet, the Internet of Things. And that's what we call at W3C the Web of Things. And you probably won't be able to read this from the back, and you don't need to read it. But this is from a book called Building the Web of Things. And it just shows the stack of different technologies and the model that we are looking at W3C in terms of trying to build this web. So at the very bottom layer, you have the infrastructure, all the sensors and actuators, even the passive ones like a QR code, all the way to devices and whole machines like a self-driving car. But as been said also in the previous roundtable, the universality. So how do they talk to each other, all those different objects? And so there's the access layer, and we can use existing technologies like HTTP, HTML, JSON, all those things that are already being already long standardized by ITF and W3C and already exist. Then there's the findability aspect. So there is a sensor somewhere here in the room. How do you actually find it to be able to connect to it? There's also here the semantic web that provides a lot of opportunities. And so on. So it goes on and on. You need authentication and control. There was a discussion about privacy. That's very important. Who is allowed to access what and which information gets represented how, all the way to the composition layer. And all those technologies already exist today to build such a web of things. And it's really a continuation of how we see the web. The web started off as a static document format. It was for physicists to exchange information at the CERN laboratory, as many of you might know. But Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web today, calls it connected miniature computers. So he sees every web page as a miniature computer. And that is true, in fact. If you think about all those applications, web applications today that exist, that you can actually program, that it's become a platform. So we call it the open web platform, to emphasize that it's become really a platform, a stack of technologies, a complex aspect. You can actually, on websites, install your own apps You might know that from social media. So it's really it's not a static page anymore. It's a whole device or system in your web page. And the web has progressed in many different industries: digital publishing, entertainment, you name it, health, and so on. Also, all sorts of different devices. We've been talking about mobile just earlier on. And mobile and web, we don't see it as different. The majority of mobile applications today are hybrids. They are using web technologies with some software components locally. But the trend is going more and more as HTML5 and all the other technologies become stronger and more powerful and more built into the computer. We are seeing less use of the software parts, and those applications are becoming more universal, which is great because we would then have the same level of expecting quality, standards, and accessibility in all of those. So really, the Internet of Things is a continuation of how the web has been developing. So having said that, it's not all rosy. We need to make this accessible in order for people with disabilities to actually be able to benefit from that. The way we look at accessibility today at the Web Accessibility Initiative is, one, is to cross-check all the W3C technologies as they emerge, HTML and all those things, to make sure they include accessibility features. For example, if you have an image, that you have a description for the image, or that you have headings and all those things that you can do in the base formats. At the same time, we have a standard called the Authoring Tool Accessibility Guidelines that looks at the authoring process, how to create accessible content, to make sure that this content is accessible, but also that the process for making the content accessible is in itself accessible to people with disabilities. We have another standard called the User Agent Accessibility Guidelines, which looks at the browsers and assistive technologies, all the things that people use in order to access the content and use it. And last but not least, we have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, which most of you in the room may have heard of already. This is really the internationally recognized standard for web accessibility. It defines the user interface requirements for accessibility. But the question is this really enough? Will this have covered? Is it all just interface aspects? And we think no, there's more to it. We want to look at the protocol level more closely. And here's really the challenge for us as an accessibility community. This is where we need to invest much more work. So the first thing is, I think there's something missing here. Yeah. So we need use cases. Right now, as all this Internet of Things and Web of Things is being developed and deployed and maturing up, we need to bring in real use cases. For example, you need to change the heating level. Does the heating system, give you the temperature in a text format so that you can represent it in Braille or in audio or in any other format? Or does it just give it to you as an image? So those are the questions that we want to know. What do we need to ensure on a protocol level? What do those sensors and actuators need to conform to in order that we can build an accessible interface at the top? That's one of the very important questions. And the more use cases we can bring in now, and I mean those as foundational and research-based use cases, the more it can be integrated into those developments for the people who are standardizing all those technologies. The other thing is about user needs and technological specifications, like how do we use a technology? And I think this has also been touched upon in the last roundtable. For example, my car always beeps when I put the wheelchair on the passenger seat because it thinks somebody's sitting there. And there's no way for me to tell it, hey, I'm just using it differently. And maybe that's not your problem. I just ignore the beeping and it doesn't stop me. But there might be real things that will actually stop you from being able to use a device because you're using it differently than people have thought of. So we need to consider those aspects and build them in. So we really need much more research in how those things are being applied in practice and how those solutions work in practice for people with disabilities to bring it into the standardization process. So that's really my last slide, an invitation to you, to the community, to come and help and participate and help us on this. There are several places or several opportunities. The work at W3C started off a lot on a so-called community group, the Web of Things community group. A community group in W3C doesn't really have any standing. It's a pre-standardization thing. Anybody can create a community group. But this community group really evolved and managed to get a lot of recognition, a lot of people joining. And so the next thing what they created is a so-called interest group. I don't want to bore you with all the W3C formalities and bureaucracy, but the idea is it's now already in a work. An interest group is defining what specifications they want to standardize. So it's becoming more and more critical. The next stage will be a working group that will actually then standardize specific specifications that are being defined now. So it's a very opportune time that we act now and that we bring in the use cases from accessibility so that all this work is looked at. From the other side, at the Web Accessibility Initiative, we have a working group called the Accessible Platform Architectures, APA. And this is the working group in the Web Accessibility Initiative that cross-checks the W3C specifications for accessibility. So here's another opportunity to participate and to help make sure those technologies are accessible. So thank you very much for that. And if you have any questions, the web address is w3.org, so w3.org/WOT for Web of Things, WOT. There you can find more information about those different activities. And of course, please don't hesitate to ask me any questions. I'd be happy to forward you to the right people. My email address is shadi, S-H-A-D-I, @w3.org. Thank you very much.